Now we are going to start this panel discussion that will be structured with very short presentation from three colleagues of us: Carina Fearnley from the University College of London Warning Research Center, who is collected online. So welcome, Carina. And Rainer Kaltenberger from MeteoAlarm, and Atsuhisa Yano from the Japan Meteorological Agency. This panel discussion will be structured. We will start with very short presentation from them, and then with an interactive discussion. I will ask them to tell us their experiences, but I will also will be very glad if all of you would like to join the discussion and share your experiences and remarks. So I will start with a presentation. Maybe Carina can start.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So lovely to see you. I hope you can see and hear me okay. I'm so sorry I can't be with you today, but thank you so much for inviting me to be here. So what I wanted to do was just to give you a little bit of background about where I'm coming from in warnings, and sort of three of my key tips that I'll probably be returning to a number of times throughout the session. So my key tips relate to how can we enhance warning effectiveness. And the reason I've put this volcano picture there is because my background's actually in volcanology. So I've actually looked at volcano early warning systems for the last 15, 17 odd years. I actually am the editor of this book called Observing the Volcano World. And we were looking at all different elements of warnings and communication, decision-making for different types of volcanic hazards, different case studies, and also using different technologies and approaches. So that's everything from like social media, Facebook, Twitter, to GIS, right through to dance, oral traditions, and indigenous knowledge. Since then, been branching out a little bit more, but my focus has been specifically on alert level systems. So I'm sort of specialist on volcano alert level systems, but now I've been looking a lot at COVID alert level systems over the last few years, and clearly warning systems and alert level systems we use for terrorism and for weather and many other different hazards. So, so from that experience, and just to classify, I'm actually a geologist by background, but I've come and sort of integrated the social science elements together. And so my approach is very multidisciplinary and very interdisciplinary. And so a sort of high level summary really is three key things that I think are really important for us to think about when we're looking at natural hazards and developing effective warnings. And one of those things is to consider the multiple hazard context, whether that's cascading events, concurrent events, or, you know, at how we integrate across those different events that are often being managed by different organizations is very, very challenging. And of course, having to integrate across all the various stakeholders, right from the organizations and institutions involved, right through to the responding or preparedness organizations, right through to the public. Now, of course, this is hugely challenging because, you know, hazards work across different spatialities, different temporalities. They also have different functions. They're having to deal with lots of different hazards and lots of different processes. So whether the warning process is technological or whether it's something more physical and so on. So we can see this little graphic here from the UN, which is, you know, the four elements of the warning system. And again, just highlighting that need to bring multiple users and multiple hazards together. So one of my recommendations is actually those four components of the warning system that you can see in this diagram here, which is a paper that I co-wrote with Carolina Garcia, is actually saying that often warnings fail when we don't think about how these elements link together and how the different organizations link together. And what's really critical is we take on board local context and flexibility, and we consider things like good governance, preparedness, defining accountability and responsibility. And ultimately, many of these come down to four key characteristics, which is accuracy, flexibility, timeliness, and transparency, and everything that's related to those 4 key components. My second key issue is working across silos, which I've kind of already alluded to, the challenge to work across those, and not just in terms of working together, but understanding, you know, what's the meteorological worlds versus the landslides world in terms of the language used, the types of tools that are used. And there needs to be more integration and exchange of sharing ideas. What works really well for volcanoes might actually give some really good insight for landslides or for tsunamis or for a nuclear warning. So we have to make sure that we're creating a way to work across those silos. And that can be done through lots of different things. I've listed 5 here, through committees, programs, successful public engagement lessons, working with the public, and really making sure that we're designing flexible, multi-directional communication, not just two-way, multi-directional, and thinking about what kinds of standardizations we're having and the decision-making processes we have. My third and final key point, I think, to raise that I've learned over the years is that warnings are a long-term social process, and that we need to absolutely focus on the first mile. So this is actually a picture of my hometown on the right here, which is Southend-on-Sea in Essex in England, and it has the longest pleasure pier in the world. So, and it's a 1 mile long. So it's there to remind me that we have to focus on the first mile and not the last mile. And as you can see from these quotes here, it's important that we make sure the people who need the information are involved first, not as a last step of setting up and operationalizing an early warning system. And then as a second quote highlights, that this process of warning should be ingrained in the everyday, day-to-day, decade-to-decade functioning of society. And that will hopefully enable us to cope with the challenges of multi-hazard warning systems. So I'm the director of the UCL Warning Research Centre. We look at lots of different hazards, and we are trying to achieve this cross collaboration, working across multiple hazards and integrating with the first mile. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm looking forward to chatting more during the session.
Thank you. Thank you. So please, Rainer.
Well, my name is Rainer Kaltenberger. A little bit to my background, I'm operational meteorologist, but I'm expert in early warning systems. I've been involved in numerous missions and projects in Africa and Southeast Asia the last couple of years. Recently finished an early warning system, hydromet early warning system in Myanmar, DMH. And I'm also a MeteoAlarm program manager since a year from now. So in this presentation, I would like to give you an overview actually on what your community could potentially learn from the hydromet community in terms of the MeteoAlarm early warning system. So what is MeteoAlarm? It's an impact-oriented common framework to aggregate, display, and make available hydromet warnings, but not just hydromet, in future also more geological warnings of UMetNet members in an easy and understandable way to the general public and to European reusers. I will come back to that in a moment. So sources are at present 37 NMHSs from Iceland to Israel. It's a multi-hazards program created already in the mid-2000s, and the program management is currently by ZMG, the NMHS of Austria. We recently fully redeveloped our system, and it became fully operational in June last year. So we are fit for the future, for more hazards, for more type of warnings. So we have currently 33 languages. It's authoritative warning information from these 37 NMHSs. And they also reach out to neighboring disciplines, local authorities, CPAs, etc. So it's much more than just a national voice. It's an easy understandable 4-level color code. So this harmonization happened quite early in the mid-2000s, which is in our terms very important to have now this consistent picture on warning levels in Europe. We have 12 warning parameters from mainly hydromet warnings, but also maritime warnings such as coastal events, wildfire, risk, and avalanche warnings, for example. It supports impact descriptions, instructions, and advisories. And we are happy that we are listed as best practice by WMO and World Bank, and currently serving as a role model for GMAS, which is the global multi-hazard alert system run by WMO. And very important aspect, large information providers and the private sector are reusers of MeteoAlarm information. So really our current focus is to working to make everything in a harmonized format available in order reusers such as Google, Apple, etc. can ingest our warnings and redisseminate them via their products and services. So very important, UNISDR send a framework compliant regional description of an expected impact scenario and a clear advice of what to do. So this is very important that a warning is based on that information. Dissemination of warnings in CAP format, CAP Common Alerting Protocol, and that's requested by reusers via feeds, for example. It's really this added common value, what we see through this consistent warning philosophy and in easy and understandable 4-level color code. MeteoAlarm 3Cs, we are working on harmonized content and meaningful content. It's about communication with civil protection authorities on a national basis and on a regional basis, and its cooperation of alerting authorities cross-border wise, especially in high impact weather situations. We also just come back from Brussels. We have a quite close collaboration with the IRCC, that's the highest civil protection authority in Europe, to work together in order they get this information out of the warnings, out of our platforms, what they need. And also we are looking forward for integration of other national partners such as avalanche services, hydro services, and in future also geological services. We have regular meetings of the MeteoAlarm expert group, so that's the advisory board of MeteoAlarm. We have the MeteoAlarm partner group consisting of national focal points who are reaching out in their country to other neighboring alerting authorities, and also technical points of contacts, which are the local CAP experts. We've also recently established a CAP working group because we see it as very crucial to work together as community and to influence also the CAP standard, which is all hazard, all media, but we need to influence the standard also for our purposes. Joint development of guidelines and warning concepts and exchange of best practices. How is it done in your country? So this is really one of the early stages of MeteoAlarm since the mid-2000s, this matrix, which was developed, and I've seen it in some of the presentations in a derived format. It's really about this color code, ample-like color code, which is also an ISO standard, from green to red. Green, everything okay. One word, just follow the weather report in that case. To yellow, be aware. Orange, be prepared. And red, take action. So really a red warning in our terms of view should be issued quite rarely because it means follow order of authorities under all circumstances and be prepared for extraordinary measures. So that's not something which you want to issue every day. And damage means like extreme damage and or casualties, mostly on large areas. So that's not avoidable. We did some work, especially in the early days, trying to harmonize our approaches through similar return periods of the events. So that was quite successful in the first years to come to similar warning levels for similar events. Something which I think is also nice to share. The risk matrix, which is used by most of our hydromet services. Meanwhile, with the x-axis is potential impacts, the y-axis likelihood or certainty. And it's important to see that the chosen color actually or warning level develops in respect of time prior to the event. For example, it was mentioned several times that the rainfall estimates are not quite sure 3 days ahead. So, but you might see something coming up based on ensemble data, etc. So you're maybe at a green level, but 2 days ahead, you see that the likelihood, both the likelihood and the potential impacts increase. So you might move within that matrix. Very important, CAP, a Common Alerting Protocol, standardized XML-based message format. Yeah, so that's really something. If you publish your warnings in CAP, you will reusers will be it will be possible for them to ingest the warnings. And this is my last slide already, that currently hydromet warnings issued by MeteoAlarm partners are redisseminated to hundreds of million end users via these large information providers, Google, Apple, IBM, the weather company. And this is just possible because we were working on a harmonized format across all our countries. And yeah, that's about it, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, Mr. Yano.
Hello, I'm Atsuhisa Yano from Japan Meteorological Agency. So please call me Atsu. I am a member of landslide warning operation team at JMA, but now I'll present overview of JMA's warnings for natural hazards. Japan is exposed to a variety of natural disasters due to its geographical features, and we, JMA, issues for multi-hazard, including earthquake, tsunami, and volcanoes. In order to mitigate the disaster caused by heavy rains and storms, we issue weather warnings and information in stages as the risk of disasters increases. Emergency warnings issued once every few decades when a very severe phenomena is expected. Warnings and advisories are issued on a municipal basis for smoother disaster responses and actions. In addition, a few days in advance, we also provide probability information on the risk of severe weather phenomena expected to exceed the warning criteria within the next 5 days. This table shows the image. We provide probability of warnings from tonight to early tomorrow morning by evening to avoid evacuation during midnight. And from the day after tomorrow to 5 days ahead to support the preparation of DRR stakeholders. As for rainfall-related disasters warnings, this table shows what information will be issued according to expected disaster levels by municipalities that are responsible for instructing residents to take evacuation actions. This is a national design called alert level for landslide, flood, and storm surges that require evacuation actions, which is established by the Cabinet Office and shown to municipalities nationwide. I'd guess purple is an unusual color for you. The left side of the table shows actions to be taken by residents following the information from municipalities. Warnings and advisories by JMA and others are clearly stated on the right side with levels corresponding to the alert levels. As a result, warnings or information by JMA, response of municipalities, and actions to be taken by residents are linked to each other, and it is expected to lead to the immediate evacuation. In addition, we also provide a nationwide colored grid warning product on risk level in colors using a standardized color code, in which the index at each location is translated into a risk level according to vulnerability there. This information is called the real-time risk map. It enables people to visually grasp on a map where and how much disaster risk of these 3 types of rainfall-induced hazards, landslide, inundation, and floods, within a few hours are increasing. It has 1 kilometer spatial resolution and is updated every 10 minutes. The aim is to promote pinpoint and effective evacuation by using this map as a supplementary information in combination with warnings. This figure shows how to calculate indices of rainfall-related hazards potential. We use a simple tank model consisting of 3 levels to calculate indices for landslide, inundation, and flood. Let me skip the details. There are many active volcanoes in Japan. These photos are examples for eruption, ballistic projectiles, and pyroclastic flows. JMA issues volcanic warnings based on the result of observation, monitoring, and evaluation to mitigate the effect of related disasters for 111 active volcanoes in Japan. When extremely hazardous volcanic phenomena such as ballistic projectiles, pyroclastic flows, and mud flows caused by snow melt, or expansion of affected area is expected, volcanic warnings are issued for areas where extremely hazardous volcanic phenomena are expected. And volcanic alert levels for 49 active volcanoes describe warning target areas and recommended action to be taken by disaster management organizations and residents in 5 levels depending on volcanic activity. Yeah, finally, these are images of earthquake early warnings, EWs. I guess this is more famous than other early warning system. Yeah, it's ended. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you all for these 3 short, I'm sorry, but interesting presentations. Okay, let's start the discussion. We saw that early warning can include several different topics, several different issues. So we should say that, including also social aspects, as Hiroaki Nakaya said, also as Carina Fearnley said. So we should say that early warning is for sure is a complex issue, but complexity means also challenges. So I would like to ask you, in your experiences, in your practice, what was the main challenge you faced from an operational perspective? I don't know who wants to reply first. Maybe Carina.
Hi, yeah, no, it's a good question. I think from our perspective in the Warning Research Centre, where obviously we're pulling together different perspectives and viewpoints from lots of different hazards and different agencies. I think one of the biggest challenge I think we face in terms of developing good early warning systems still is the fact that many people still consider warnings as just being a siren and a sort of just the technological part of it. And we all know that that's so much more complicated, both in terms of the art of understanding the science that's involved and interpreting quite often large amounts of data and trying to make sense of that, and trying to give the best possible forecasts and predictions that we can possibly give. And also just at the other end, in terms of, warnings kind of haven't really been hugely on the radar. I say that, of course, with 2004 Boxing Day tsunami generated a huge interest in tsunamis, but sort of interest has sort of fallen a little bit since then, and it's just peaking this year, of course, with the UN Secretary General's focus on developing early warnings for all, which will be an exciting program. So I think, with people not really paying too much attention to warnings being seen as a siren, that's been really a real barrier. And what it's not done is really helped us with integrating that first mile and thinking about the customer, the client, the person who is standing, at the bottom of the hill facing the landslide or the tsunami coming to them, and thinking about how are they going to make decisions? What decisions can they make? How can they get to safety? And how are they getting their warnings? Is it through technology, or is it through traditional knowledge, or is it from long-term educational perspectives? So So those are sort of the main challenges. And if I've got just one more minute, I'll just say that actually I think one of the other really key areas we have in terms of challenges is actually the uncertainty. And this is not, I don't think this is such a huge thing on the sort of scientists' side, or even the civil protection emergency manager side, because, you know, all these groups are very used to operating around uncertainty and also in a precautionary way. But it's also the policy makers, sometimes the government decision makers, that really struggle with that level of uncertainty, partly because they're having to jug, you know, the finances and their own political perspectives and terms. And so it can be very difficult with dealing with that uncertainty. And quite often there's a huge pressure to standardize warnings and make them simple so we can understand them. But we have to be careful that we do consider the local, social, cultural, political context, because otherwise those warnings might be easy to understand from a sort of international or large scale perspective, but not necessarily to the local people, to the individual, the customer who actually needs to make their decision. And so I think those are really some of the key challenges, along with how do we make warnings timely? And of course, that is totally dependent on the hazard and our knowledge of that hazard and capability to forecast, as was just discussed by Yano in terms of the earthquake early warning systems. You know, we might only get 50 seconds, but if we're prepared, that can make a huge difference. So lots and lots of challenges, I think, for warnings that I've highlighted there, but those are the sort of the main ones. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So,
Right. Yeah, obviously there are a lot of challenges and it's difficult to pick out the most important ones. A lot of them were mentioned already by Carina, but maybe on a national level first, and we are carrying out surveys frequently among our members, and we have these partner group meetings, so we are quite aware of where the challenges are at the moment of NMHSs. So currently it's really about the transition from purely threshold-based criteria to impact-based warning criteria, and to find the impact criteria for respective warning levels, and also how to do the impact assessment, of course, especially incorporating exposure and vulnerability. So that's really difficult. Also, because we want to, at least through MeteoAlarm, we want to deliver warnings for the general public. And it's really difficult because the general public has different exposure. For example, every single person has a different risk profile, and it's very difficult to provide the one warning for the general public. So, right. Also, quite a challenge is impact data to verify our warnings in the end. And it's also very important to have them in real time, if possible, to get the ground truth for the operational staff out there to verify and adjust the warnings. So at European scale, I would say harmonization of the warning format, both technical and content-wise. So fortunately now, since we have agreement that we all support the CAP format, this is easier because it's well written within CAP on how to codify and codify this information. But also what is challenging, especially in multi-hazard early warning systems, is to connect respective communities with each other, especially the hydro with the MET community and the geo community as well, and really reach out to neighboring disciplines. And part of the challenge is because we have different legislation in all of our countries, and also there is different relationship between the alerting authorities and civil protection authorities. In many countries it's really well and it's good, but in other countries this relationship is challenging sometimes. So it's really about the who is doing what, and that's going back to legislation.
I agree. I think the need for standards for homogeneity is urgent at this point. Mr. Yano.
So yeah, from a technical point, so our main challenges is the improvement of accuracy of criteria. Yeah. So we are trying to improve the observation of water vapor. Sorry. Yeah. And we try to improve the water vapor stream observation, and we try to verify the ensemble methods of forecast. These are main challenge, I think.
Thank you. Is there any comment from the audience? Someone wants, please.
Thank you. Well, I have one question. My name is Mario Reyes. I'm from El Salvador, and we issue every day impact-based forecast. So we have had a big discussion about what is the best way to communicate the results of our assessment. For example, we conducted a survey to see what people wanted, and in our risk matrix, well, in the y-axis is the likelihood of occurrence of an event, and people want to not just a categorical value, but a numerical value with the probability of occurrence of that event. We think that people wanted that, but they don't understand that particular numerical value. So in your experience, what is the best way to communicate the result of our impact-based forecast, such as like a categorical way of the likelihood of occurrence of an event, or the numerical value?
Yeah, thank you, Mario. Actually, this was one of the questions on my list. So maybe we can skip and go. You can also reply to this. I don't know. We can use the same order. Maybe Carina, please.
Yes, this is to do with the qualitative versus quantitative aspect. Is that right? Because I had a little bit of trouble hearing. Is that correct? Yeah, perfect. Yeah. No, it's a really good question about the impact-based forecasting, and it's a really interesting question, because also it questions whether we're also going far enough. Like, is the impact enough? Like, what's the next stage in terms of getting people to do something about it? You know, like, so I think in many ways, giving people an idea about what the impact is might help them understand it, but does that we still don't know whether that actually translates to people actually doing things. So, and I think if we're sort of kind of talking about this qualitative versus quantitative way and how it's best to make those sorts of decisions, it's really confusing, right? And often we confuse risk and uncertainty, and then on top of that we've got lots of ignorance, so things that people or scientists aren't aware of, and also ambiguity, so lots of different things that we're differing our perspectives over. I personally think quantitative work and providing probabilities can be very useful, but when we're dealing with a disaster, like a disaster in the making, I think that actually we're looking beyond the science, and especially when we're looking at the policy context. And so you know, models can only be as good as the actual model itself and the quality of the input. In fact, my background is actually the weather forecast for 1987 in the UK, when very famously Michael Fish, our UK Met Office meteorologist, stood up in front of everyone and said, there won't be a hurricane today. People are making rumours about it, but there won't be a big storm. It'll all be fine. And of course, we had one of the biggest storms in our history. So you know, even then we can see sort of an impact-based forecasting failing there. So I think, you know, in terms of qualitative versus quantitative, I think really it's difficult, because how do we factor in, when we're giving probabilities, how do we factor in the probability in multi-hazard context? You know, that gets really complicated. How do we integrate lots of different stakeholders into that process of understanding what those probabilities mean, or what those words mean? You know, the IPCC have done a lot of work around that in terms of trying to make sure that certain terms have certain understandings, but it's all hugely subjective. So really, I think that it's not necessarily a question of qualitative versus quantitative, impact versus, you know, mapping or whatever. I think it's really about thinking about how do people make decisions and addressing that gap. And that means communicating, working out what people need, how do they understand information, how do they interpret that information, and then using that to actually guide how we can best give warnings to that particular group of people, which may be different, obviously globally, nationally, different levels, different countries, and also for different hazards, which of course makes it really difficult for multi-hazard. So I hope that helps give a little bit of my insights into that.
Yeah, please, Mauro Rossi wants to join the discussion.
Yeah, I believe it's really fundamental first, understanding which is your institutional settings. This can be made via an institutional mapping on how the civil protection chain works in your country, because civil protection authorities and chains are pretty different. If we start from Italy, we have a particular settings. If we go in India, we have a different settings, and probably in El Salvador. What is important is you may have multiple users, but not at the same time. You may have multiple users in cascade. And you may tailor the message that you give depending on the user that first received the message. This depends on the capability of the user to dealing with, for instance, with quantitative probabilistic predictions. And this is who will make the first elaboration going towards a qualitative message. And then in chain, this will go maybe to the public. So this is to me what is really fundamental. Understanding which is your institutional settings, defining which is capable of managing or understanding or interpreting this kind of information, and finally decide which is the message to give.
Okay, there's Michele also that wants to join.
Thank you very much. No, interesting points also what Mario has been saying, Carina and the others, but I want to ask ourselves, in order to understand the different users, yes, the institutional settings are important and the messages have to be tailored towards specific users we intend to reach with our warning messages. At the same time, I'm wondering, I put for myself a question when we were talking about, Rainer was talking about MeteoAlarm. You are harmonizing in Europe. You are giving to us, for instance, in Italy, for instance, in my region, a warning for the entire region. Campania region is where I live, in Italy. At the same time, another institutional actor is giving me different warnings. Italian actor giving me different warnings. At the same time, some private actors, meteo apps, are giving to the public warnings. Sometimes they are getting, as you said, they are retrieving institutional warnings and disseminating them, but some other times they are acting on their own with their own messages, with their own icons and graphical messages. I'm wondering, how can we, that goes to what Carina was saying, how do people act? We have to ask ourselves at the end of the day, how people make decisions. Indeed, shall we really, being in this room, so experts working at different levels, can we really neglect the fact that at the end of the day, even if it's our institutional messages, the correct one, users indeed get multiple messages from multiple sources, and how do we deal with that? So this is a question for the panelists or for everybody. How can we deal with these multiple sources of information getting to us at a very constant rate and very actually increasing rate from different actors? And if we have to do something, my final input for the discussion, can we tell to ourselves that maybe it's better not to say anything rather than to add something to the confusion, so that at least, maybe 3 days in advance, we don't say anything for a specific hazard, for a specific region, so that we don't add to the confusion? That's my comment.
Right. Yeah, you're addressing the problem of conflicting messages or conflicting warnings. And yeah, that's indeed a problem. But I think that's something which is really on the national scale, where like alerting authorities should work with each other, for example, on a platform such as a National Hazards Partnership, to really define clearly roles and responsibilities within disaster management cycle. And talking about hydromet warnings or weather warnings now, it's really, we are currently in the process of making in the transition of warnings, just describing what the weather will be, such as, I don't know, like rainfall 150 millimeters within the next 24 hours, to what the weather will do. So localized floods are possible, riverine floods, to local landslides are possible within that area. But that's still what we promote, at least on national level, within our Met services, is really like start first with generic warnings, and weather service will not issue, at least through MeteoAlarm, usually like a very specific warning, which, for example, that this bridge is not accessible due to a severe flood or something. So that's really this action on a local scale. This is within civil protection authorities. So I think we have these different levels of information also in terms of warning information. And of course, it needs to be ensured that these messages do not conflict with each other. But I think still this is possible, and in a lot of countries there are very good examples in Europe where this works very well.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Yano,
Yeah.
would you like to contribute? Yeah.
So in Japan also, there are many users and diversity. There are diverse users, and for example, railway company and private forecast company and so on. So yeah, we have many weather information and it is complex. So we JMA teach how to use the information. We teach municipalities and mass media how to use information. Yeah, I think this is important.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. So there was another comment from the audience.
My name is Adityan. I'm from India. I'm at the university in India. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself the last time. So taking the point from Michele, when you get information from multiple sources, like I'll take an example. We can take the USGS earthquake hazards program, which tells us there's an earthquake, as immediately they identify using the seismological networks. So they do not give a final depth estimate or the magnitude until they have the full calculations. So if we can come up with standards, if we say landslide, then we have these kind of informations are required to forecast or nowcast. And similarly, if we take flood, volcano, then these are the parameters that we require. So in satellite images, they call this as metadata. That's another example. You call it as cloud cover, the date, the time of images acquisition. So similarly, we need to make metadata standards for data acquisition or the inflow of the data for various hazards. In that way, when there is a lot of influx of information from multiple sources, we can categorize this at the source level, and based on the credibility of the information, we can use that to give reliable warnings. How do we deal with this? Make inventories of possible disasters, and then we use these kind of reliable data sets for forecasting. Then maybe we can have a proper way to communicate this to the scientists first, then simplify this and give it to the common public. So I mean, when we have some system like this in place, because if another example, if I can give you, when I search for landslides or hash earthquake-induced landslides on Twitter. There will be multiple sources. So what can the user understand from that? Because we are still tweeting in scientific language. People cannot understand pore pressure data set. They don't know what that means. Even to a certain extent, people do not understand mm per hour, millimeter per hour of rainfall. You know, it's simple, but then we need to they need to understand. So if we have a system metadata format for each disasters, and we have a good database of all these information that can come in, that could possibly come in, and we rate them on the credibility, then we have a good database, and then simplify that, and the whole process can happen faster and reach the common man in more efficient and a timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, I just want to point out that actually searching on Twitter using the hashtag landslides was very complicated some years ago during the United States campaign, electoral campaign, because former President Donald Trump used the hashtag landslide during his campaign, and so Twitter was only full of political tweets not related to landslides actually. So this was very complicated. So please, Hiro.
Thinking about local authorities and partnership, I mean the local engagement. Bringing local engagement into landslide warning is very important, as I stressed in my presentation. However, being warning, unlike other academic achievement and academic results, which can be carried into the society through some sort of products, it is informative coercion. Warning is forcing somebody to do something. So there is certain aspects of coercion in the alert or warning business. So that's why I think it's important to bring a local partnership into our calculus. Bringing partnership into our calculus is Japanese strategy, actually my strategy back in the 2 decades. By bringing them into our partnership, we put them in charge of warning. Thereby, they cannot bring lawsuits against meteorological agency where I have worked for. So that's one of the reasons. And they want to maintain certain level of credential, so they will speak more responsibly. You know, the dichotomy of agent and client, you know, the master and client model is not working. So that's why the partnership is to be put in squarely. We need to be very cautious about the nature of warning, which is coercive, unlike other academic results. So that's the point I want to make.
Yeah, I agree. This was also this is also a very important topic. Also because at the end, local authorities, they have to deal with population. And actually, this was one of the main aim of creating this network, this LandAware network, to put together to try to make connection between academics from one side, the experts, technicians, and also authorities. So there's someone. Oh, Graciela, please.
Yeah, Graziella from ME. Yes, I want to add to what Hiro mentioned before. For us, it was important to have the partnership with the road authority and also with the railway authority. And there was a big discussion at the beginning when we sent a lot of this kind of false alarms. I mean, as a scientist, you interpret it as a false alarm or too many yellow, let's say, in our language. And but for them, it was useful to have that because sometimes we are not sure if we have this expression. We say we are in the lower yellow lower yellow level.
Light yellow.
And so we say, should we send a warning or not? And for them, they say that it's very useful to send anyway, even if, and they understand how the hero said that our warning is too general or too coarse, but they understand that, and they prefer to have this than have nothing. And so the partnership, I think it's very important. And probably we have less contact with the municipality, but this, I mean, between us and the people that doing the forecast with the municipality. But now we will have a new project on working on impact-based warning. We'll focus first on flood, but I think there we can connect, start to connect also with the municipality as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Mateja.
Hello, everyone. I am Mateja Jemac-Auflic, coming from Geological Survey of Slovenia. In our case, the connection with the local community is also very important. We have our two kind of early warning at the moment, one on local level. In here, this connection goes very well when we issue, let's say, alarms. But when we are talking about regional landslide forecast system, we face with many, let's say, uncertainty, because local people easily adopt warnings about floods because they are seeing the river is increased. But in contrast, when we talk about landslide, when we issue a landslide alarm, we cannot say so sure where it would appear if we, of course, appear. So here I think it's very important that we need to do much more detailed local forecast landslides alarms, let's say, and not so much focus on regional. This is from the case in Slovenia. So we are looking for, let's say, to establish much more local forecast system in the future. For now, we have one local for one very prone area, but for the rest of country, we are, let's say, working on the more regional level, and we do not have very good feedbacks from the locals.
Yeah. There was also Luca Bijurlo.
Thank you, Stefano. I just want to link what I'm going to say with what Graziella and Mateja were mentioning, something about uncertainties, specifically about performance analysis. That is something that together with Michele Calvello, we were working a bit in the past. This is a question to the panelists, but also to others. Well, performance from my point of view can be analyzed from effective and effectiveness. So if how efficient or effective can be, if we are speaking about technical performance or social performance. But if we go on the technical performance, how you would do that, how you do that if you do that, how you analyze the performance, how you deal with a low warning level, a yellow one, and multiple landslides occurring in a very short time. Is it a correct warning? Is it a wrong one? Or on the other hand, the highest warning level, and then you have one landslide or a few. Is it correct or is it wrong? So my curiosity here is to understand how you are dealing with that, how you are evaluating the performance, and we are speaking about technical performance, not what is going to do the users, the element at risk when you issue the warning. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Luca. Actually, I would like to add a side topic, or not so side actually, to your question, because we saw that very often it's not a matter of only one hazard, but it's a matter of a multi-hazard word. No, we say weather-related hazards, as Mattia said, floods and landslides together. On the other side, we have rainfall-induced landslide and earthquake-induced landslide. So, and above all, we have some colleagues dealing with weather forecasts, weather reports, and so there are different aspects. So let me add also this issue to your question. So what are the main uncertainties in a multi-hazard perspective? What are the pros and the cons? So, and let me ask Carina about it.
Thanks. There's lots of really good questions and things coming out there. So really great to hear all those comments. Yeah, I think just in terms of the performance element, I think it's really hard with performance, and it depends on the hazard as well. You know, some hazards, like when we have more data with weather, it is possible to create that more quantitative element of measuring the performance of how effective you were in terms of getting it right. Some other hazards like volcanoes that don't happen necessarily very often, that can be very challenging. So I think when we're looking at the performance, it's an element of what are your metrics, what are your indicators for that performance, and of course that changes different hazards. Sort of coming into this multi-hazard perspective, there's lots of pros and cons, and I have to say that honestly, having been at the multi-hazard early warning systems conference in Bali earlier this year, I'm really not convinced there's a huge amount of very successful examples of truly multi-hazard early warning systems yet. I think we're seeing more of that coming as we focus more on sort of climate change and sort of the increasing large-scale events. But I think what it comes back to is the things that I've mentioned, other people have mentioned, working across different silos, working across different institutions, working across different levels. And this, you know, goes beyond just using a checklist. This actually requires coordination between different organizations and institutions and governments and nations. And that's difficult because each of those people have their own legal or institutional requirements within that. So in a way, we almost need to rethink how we're doing things to all work together and create that cohesiveness. And I think just one thing I wanted to add on the early warning things is that for multiple hazards is that quite often we develop warning systems in isolation. So we'll look at tsunamis, we'll look at landslides, we'll look at volcanoes in isolation. And what can happen is when we have a situation where there's multiple things happening at the same time, we can actually see events happening that push people into a dangerous situation. So you might evacuate a volcano to get to go to the coastline to evacuate the volcano, but then if a storm comes, you're then vulnerable because you're on the coastline. So I think the thing is many countries don't have the luxury of developing their mitigation or warning strategies or laws around multiple hazards. They do it on one hazard over time. And I think we really need to step back and think we need to look at the bigger picture. We need to look at how these interact with each other, which may do in unexpected ways, and think about how can we make it so that they work in terms of reinforcing safety, in terms of reinforcing a clear message, a coherent message, and it comes back to the point that was made earlier in terms of making sure that message is the same, whatever that institution or whichever level it's coming from, so people don't get confused.
Thank you. And Rainer?
Yeah, maybe just as an add-up information, because it was mentioned, technical performance, social performance. Just to mention it, there is currently a huge program within WMO, World Weather Research Program, High Impact Weather Project, where exactly those questions, especially technical performance, but also social performance, because if you issue a warning, doesn't mean that the people react, not at all, if they don't understand the warning or other issues as well. So within the High Impact Weather Project, there are a lot of social scientists also collaborating together with natural scientists to exactly doing research on also the warning message. But what was mentioned as well, the technical performance, this really goes back to impact data, and what we see that's really an issue is the lack of standardized impact data. And of course, there are currently lots of different approaches. For example, one example from Austria, from my institute, we're currently elaborating with emergency call-outs. But of course, in an abandoned valley, there might be landslides, for example, or no one will recognize it because there is no emergency, because no one was affected. And yeah, so I think there's still a lot of research needs to be done, both for the technical and the social performance, I think. And coming to the multi-hazard perspective, I mean, it depends on the wording, because we have different wording. We have also compound hazards or cascading hazards, but in the end, it's really, and it was mentioned already, the collaboration between institutions and partnerships to work together, undergo research together with inclusion of social scientists to master this challenge.
Thank you. Maybe Mr. Yano.
Yeah. So yeah, we are lack of the social performance review. So yeah, when severe phenomena or disaster happened, so we are doing a questionnaire from municipalities and people. So the users comment, we use it for as social performance.
Thank you. Okay, please.
Yeah, in terms of the social performance and the risk communication aspect of early warning, like it's clear that to Carina's point, these hazards shouldn't be considered in isolation, but I think there's also from a technical standpoint, it's important too, and just using an example from Canada last year that was kind of a lesson learned a hard way is the relationship between different hazards and the causational relationship between different hazards. So last year in British Columbia, we had one of the largest droughts on record, which led to one of the worst fire seasons on record, followed by an atmospheric river in the fall, which, because of the fires, the impact, the social impact of the flooding, the atmospheric river was much worse. So there's this kind of chain of triggering between different hazard types that I think is probably kind of a shoot for the moon or shoot for the stars kind of idea, but like, how is there a way to consider other hazard types in a warning system? Sorry if that's not really a coherent thought, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but maybe the panelists could comment on that.
Yeah, I will. Carina, sorry, I didn't see you. Sorry.
No, just a really quick one. I think that's a really good point, and I think, you know, that's the beauty of looking across lots of different hazards. So if we look at more the climate change, or say something like famine or epidemic health issues, for those guys, they don't have the luxury of data like we have on the sort of geophysical side, if you like, and so they do have to look at those sort of signals, or like changes in the landscape. You know, is there the drought? What kind of weather's going on? What kind of long-term patterns can we see changing in migration patterns to allude to the fact that there might be a drought or there might be a famine? And I think we can take some of the techniques and the skills that those types of warning that are very integrated and often very global, like the famine early warning system, I think we can take elements of that and try and bring that in here. Say, can we see those sort of long-term, you know, cascading tipping points that might occur, especially even we're looking at, more and increased hazards from climate change. So I think there are things we can learn from other hazards and integrate those in that I think will give us a starting point to do that. And I think that kind of foresight and planning and scenario running is a very effective thing. And I know that some civil protection and scientific agencies are really good at doing that kind of, thinking out of the box thinking. So I think it's a really good point. It'd be really great to see how we can integrate that better.
Yeah, thank you. So is there anyone else? Hiro, for the last round before lunch break.
This is Hiro. What Carina has said and what Dick rightly pointed out are very important. I mean, we need exposure analysis. Exposure means we need to know who the audience is, of course. And not many people are living in a fortress. Not many people has this luxury of having a shelter, like almighty shelter. And many people are aging, they cannot move any longer. For those people who cannot move, the evacuation-oriented warning is meaningless. So we need to develop certain way in collaboration with social scientists to analyze the degree of exposure and dynamics of exposure more carefully to develop the better products in the landslide community focusing, this area. So exposure analysis is very important. But landslide is just only one phenomenon. And I used to work for the CAP, Common Alerting Protocol, with Art Bottrell. He works with me in FEMA back in the US era. He always says, that multi-hazard is the answer. But nobody has this brain, the capability to cover all the area. How in the world we can do it? The only way is to collaborate together, to work together with other fields. To do that, we need to go beyond our silo. So our stovepipe. I think although LandAware is focusing on landslide is just one topic. It's just one example. But I think this is a very good example to develop and work with other areas. So that's why I'm here and I'm still committing to this executive committee. So we are looking forward to have some more, committed comments from the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Hiro. I agree with you. Evacuation-based warnings are the most dangerous because make people angry, both in case of false alarm, correct alarm, and missed alarm is probably the most dangerous and most complicated. So I would like to thank you all. Thank Rainer, Atsuhisa, and Carina for having joined the panels. And I would like to thank all of you for this very interesting discussion.